Well, to finish the show here, certainly last but absolutely not least, the story that has really, I think, captivated much of the world, the martial law declaration in South Korea by President Yoon and the response of the South Korean people that seems to have beaten that back, at least for now. But, I'm not going to give you the details. We're going to bring in someone who really knows what they're talking about. Dae-Han Song, who leads the contents team of the International Strategy Center, is also a part of the No Cold War Collective and an associate at the Korea Policy Institute, is here with us. Dae-Han, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on the show, Eugene.
Listen, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. There's so much to say here. I don't even know where to start. Maybe I'll just start here. What was behind this attempted martial law? I mean, what was Yoon hoping to accomplish? And what does it say that it was so, reversed so quickly? Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, just immense popular outrage in South Korea.
Sure. I think a lot of us were pretty shocked when the martial law was called. I was at a funeral and I remember that just everybody was like, oh my God, like, on their phones, it's just popping and saying, like, Yoon has just declared martial law, right? None of us believed it. And I mean, the reversal, of course, has to do with the mobilization of people, right? Like people just mobilized rapidly. When I dropped off those people, like they immediately just rushed to the National Assembly, right? Activists, organizers, just common people, right? I've heard that stories about delivery drivers that just stopped their deliveries and they just like rushed over people that were just relaxing at home when they saw the declaration. They just rushed over, and basically within an hour people were already trickling in, and by 12 a.m. there were thousands of people already in front of the National Assembly. And of course it was these people in front of the National Assembly that actually prevented the armored trucks from entering the National Assembly grounds, and basically struggled with the special forces soldiers to prevent them from blocking the vote that happened, that actually rescinded the martial law, right? A lot of them outside were chanting, abolish martial law, down with the dictatorship, all of this while the assembly members were voting to revoke the martial law, right? So there's also a lot of reporting that says that the soldiers that were mobilized, a lot of them afterwards, as they demobilized, they like apologized to the crowd, all of this. I mean, I think all of this is only possible because people so rapidly showed up and showed that President Yoon is illegitimate, that nobody supports this declaration of martial law, that is completely ridiculous. Yeah, and I think so. The people, in effect, played a crucial role. As regards to like what led Yoon to do this, basically he was backed into a corner, right? He was rapidly becoming a lame duck president, right? A budget bill that he was trying to pass, which would have increased his discretionary spending for the presidential office, for the prosecutor's office, which he controls, right? A lot of this was being blocked in the National Assembly. Also, like a lot of the accusations around stock manipulation and bribery that around his wife, around the first lady, were also just dominating the news, becoming even bigger. And also, it was just a matter of time before there was going to be a vote in the National Assembly that would have overturned Yoon's veto that he had been exercising on the special investigation on her and on him, that that would likely have passed the National Assembly. So he was basically backed into a corner, and I think he just thought that this was his only way.
hmm One of the things I think is important here, and at least from my view outside looking in about people mobilizing so rapidly, is people in, South Korea, they know what martial law means and the long struggle over many years to have, the right to have elections, democratic rights, the many people who were killed. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that as well, because I think most people in the United States, at least, are pretty ignorant about, I think, that period of South Korea's history.
Sure. The last time that martial law was declared was in 1980, May 17, 1980. And this was basically against a lot of the protests by students that started with students and kind of spread to the larger public that were calling for democracy, right, to the end of the dictatorship. And of course, like direct presidential elections happened in 1988 amidst protests, democratization protests. And so, yeah, it was wild, right? Nobody thought that within a lot of the younger people, nobody thought that within their lifetimes, in this day of age of like in Korea, like somebody would declare martial law, right? And of course, I think very important is that 1980 martial law was what prolonged the dictatorship, right? And of course, what they used to justify it was that there's like North Korean infiltration, that there's like anti-state forces, and of course Yoon was doing that again this time. And the thing that both of them have in common is that there was no threat, right? There was no North Korean infiltration. It was a complete. It was just a way to basically increase their legitimacy, hold on to power, right? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it very. I've certainly. It's amazing, really, that they we would do this. I was myself shocked, given that history and everything that had gone past. But here we are. It seems like President Yoon is trying to hang on, and interestingly enough, his party, which was leadership at least, was critical. Now is saying, well, we're going to defend him from being impeached. I mean, you can't predict the future, so it's hard to say. I mean, do you think that is tenable, or given how sort of extreme this step was, that Yoon will ultimately have to step down?
Sure. Well, I think a couple of things is important to know, right? For example, the Conservative Party already had two presidents, or one president impeached while in office and incarcerated, President Park Geun-hye, and another president, Lee Myung-bak, uh, imprisoned after he left office, right? So if Yoon is also in prison, that's a massive existential blow to them, right? So even as they're acknowledging that declaring martial law, that there were no, it was insufficient grounds to declare martial law. Despite that, they're also saying that they're not gonna uh, vote for the impeachment motion, right? And I think at this point, what is key is people's mobilization, right? Like right after on Thursday, right after martial law was lifted, there were protests that were happening in Seoul, and these protests need to keep getting bigger. There's going to be a protest every night, and it's going to culminate on Saturday when people from all across the country are going to be coming in and congregating in Gwanghwamun, which is Seoul's main plaza, right? And I think a lot of this is just reminiscent of the 2016, 2017 candlelight protests that brought down President Park Geun-hye that was in power at that time, right? And it's just clear that politicians will only move when there is sufficient people in the streets, when there's sufficient yeah, protests, right, and rallies to keep. There's so many bureaucratic moments, bureaucratic pitfalls that could prevent the process from happening, right? And of course these are all safeguards to power, right? But I think when people are there and keep pushing the process forward, I think that's what's gonna make sure that corruption and abuse of power are like held accountable.
No, I think that's a very relevant point. The State Department has made their announcement today saying the U.S. South Korea relationship transcends any particular president. So I think, there's sort of, I don't know if that's distance or not, but certainly seeming to say that they maybe are not going to rally to Yoon's cause. I mean, I wonder if what you think the repercussions could potentially be. I mean, obviously, President Yoon has been very much in lockstep with the United States on, the military issues in Northeast Asia, other pieces like that. If him being in turmoil, possibly being moved off the scene by a popular protest movement, how that might affect some of the geopolitical elements that have been heavily pushed by him, the Biden administration, and the Japanese government over the past few years.
Sure. I think the Yoon administration, almost like from the beginning, was losing a lot of popularity and legitimacy because he started. There's there's a whole history of like Japan never had been held accountable for its war crimes and its during colonialism, during its imperialist war. They weren't held accountable, and of course that's connected to a whole long history also of like U.S. intervention in the region and the U.S. basically allowing Japan off the hook, uh, in order to prop up a power in the region that could anti-communist power, right? But I guess the impact would be big, right? Because the last time there was a shift from a conservative to a liberal president, that's also a period that opened up a lot of like rapprochement with North Korea, right? When inter-Korean relationships started to improve, and that's also when basically Moon Jae-in that came after Park Geun-hye, right, came with the mandate to change Korean society. And one of the things he started doing was he started building peaceful relations, improving relations with North Korea. And of course, that paved the way for Trump to be able to have the different summits with Kim Jong Un. And that could also be a likely possibility, right? Um, I think one important point to note, though, is that I think at the end of the day, basically the people need to be out in the streets. Progressive movements need to mobilize around like around a progressive agenda that does involve like a more balanced approach in the region as opposed to Yoon's such a strong, heavy pro United States centered approach that also involves like reaching out to North Korea, trying to repair a lot of the damage that was done under the Yoon administration. Um, yeah, and just also pushing a lot of progressive agendas around like democratic reforms, right? This is the second time that it's happening, right? It's like it happened in 2016, it's happening again in 2024. Like there has to be democratic reforms to limit the power of the president that is just too excessive, to limit the power of the prosecutor's office. These democratic reforms need to happen to prevent this from happening again.
Well, we're going to be watching this closely. This is, I think one of the most interesting stories that's out there in the world today. And we really appreciate you, Dae-Han Song of the International Strategy Center, being willing to join us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.